Hello and welcome to Funny Paranormal Stories. I'm going to start by saying that I really went back and forth on making this video. Not because it isn't an interesting topic, but because it was something fairly different from what I normally talk about. Much like last week's video, where it could have fit in with real versus real, but at the same time couldn't, this video could fit with personal paranormal, but at the same time, it can't. I am probably making this more confusing than it needs to be. Suffice to say, the following are stories that can have a paranormal presence involved, but ultimately the situation is funny. As a heads up, I have talked about two of the stories in the past, but we recently have been having quite a few new viewers of my content, so not everyone may know them. I promise you that no one should be disappointed with the last story, since it just happened recently, and it was quite funny. Also, when looking up the topics of funny paranormal stories, no one seems to be talking about it. So why not diverge from the creepy or scary and enjoy some fun encounters? The sixth family member. Quite a few years ago, we moved into our first house rather than the usual apartment. The whole thing was very exciting and we had quite a few good moments. The bad side to this was that it quickly became apparent that our new home still had some residents there that were of the ghostly variety. We realized that we had what appeared to be a blonde-haired Amish boy living in our attic who never caused problems, and even though we never saw him, an oppressive spirit that lived in the basement. The feeling was so strong that the whole 8 years we lived there, my wife refused to enter the basement, but nothing ever happened to me when I went down there. At one point we hid a camera in the dining room trying to find out which one of our children were throwing away all their food. The trick worked, but it became unnerving when we watched the tape, and on it, after the kids came upstairs, we heard something whisper, "Ben," at the camera. Just so you know, at that moment, we knew the kids were upstairs. Just tally that up to the list of ghosts living there. In that moment of time, our kids were fairly young, and we frequently had the common problem most parents face when raising children. That is, none of them did anything wrong, even if caught on tape doing the act. Well, one day something happened, I can't remember what it was, and we sat all the kids at the dining room table. Our goal was to find out which one of them was the culprit behind what happened. Of course, all of them said that they didn't do it, and we started to get upset, saying that there are only 5 of us in the house, and if neither my wife or I did it, then it only leaves 3 possible people. We angrily started going down the list of all who could have done it, and just as we finished naming the last person, something happened that startled us all. Out of nowhere, a loud voice of a man came from the basement door, and he yelled, "I did it!" This voice was so clear and loud, it would sound like I am talking to you now. All of us stopped talking and looked at each other and said, "Did you hear that?" Everyone in the room, including the kids, heard it all too clear. Needless to say, it ended the argument pretty quickly. I actually think we found out later our son actually did whatever we were complaining about. Yet, it always left us questioning how much of the normal day issues that we had to deal with were actually the result of the man in the basement. I know this story may not seem funny, but we have laughed about it since. Just imagine a ghost getting so fed up with hearing arguing that it felt the need to speak up to get some peace and quiet. Shouldn't call me that. Our next story comes from a video I made way back in my channel's history. I won't go into the full story here, but I did want to talk about one of the funniest moments. I have always believed in ghosts, aliens, and cryptids, but when dealing with mythological beings, I found the stories fun, but a little bit far-fetched. That is, until the day I realized our house from the previous story had a creature known as a Brownie. Trust me, my wife thought I was insane at first too, until she had the opportunity to see it as well. Well, honestly it took a lot of research to figure out what exactly this thing was. To make it simpler, a Brownie is basically a house elf that can be both helpful or devious in nature. Luckily we had the version that seemed to only want to help around the house. The problem with these beings is that they are very easily upset. Some say you can feed them bread and cheese, while others say they will get upset if you do so. Fortunately, ours appeared to appreciate the food. Well, in our studies, we found a really odd situation with these beings. For some unknown reason, they absolutely hate being called or linked with fairies. One night we were laying in bed, and our topic of conversation turned to our new house guest. In a moment of not thinking on my part, I simply said, "You mean our fairy?" Immediately, I felt something hard smack me in the leg. When I got up, I saw what hit me was a full bottle that was sitting on the windowsill, 2 feet from our bed. It hit so hard that the bottle's plastic was actually still bent in. The wind couldn't have thrown the bottle the distance it had to go. Apparently, in calling it a fairy, it hit me out of anger, and sadly, left our house for good. Like I said, if you happen to find one in your house, just know that they're very easily angered. It goes bump in the day. I talked about our next story a few months ago, but I really couldn't make a video like this without at least mentioning it. As stated at the beginning, a lot of my longtime viewers know this story, but it is still fun. I have always been a night owl. Even while on the job, I am normally the first person to request going to night shift. As a construction worker, we frequently have moments through the year where we are laid off until the next job opens up. In these times, I tend to be a person who enjoys the night, but I tend to suffer from insomnia after prolonged periods of time. On one such occasion, I messed up and actually stayed up to quite early in the morning. So early that our son was getting up to get ready for school. So I decided to just wait until he left the house before going to bed. Once he was finally gone, I went upstairs and laid down in bed. I had just gotten comfortable when I heard a strange banging, kind of scratching noise coming from the living room. This was then followed up with whispering sounds and the creaking of floorboards outside our bedroom door. It wasn't too long after I heard the banging again. Immediately, my mind was thinking someone was in our house rather than it being a ghost. After hearing the sounds outside our bedroom, I grabbed a knife and quickly started checking the rooms upstairs for an intruder. Once satisfied the upstairs was clear, I waited at the top of the stairs, just listening. In that moment, I heard whispering from what seemed to be coming from the kitchen, and I could hear the floor creaking as if someone was rocking back and forth on their feet. I sat there just imagining someone waiting for me with a gun pointed at the area where I was about to come downstairs. I made peace with the idea of what happens happens and slowly crawled down the stairs. Thankfully, there wasn't anyone waiting, but at the same time, there wasn't anyone there. Again, I went to sweeping the house, including the basement, for intruders, but found no one. It then hit me that we had been having some strange activity since we recently bought a table and chairs from a guy online. So I was left with the idea that the purchase brought the bonus of a spirit attached to it. A couple days later, our son came to us saying that he heard some strange banging downstairs. This time I went down planning on catching the ghost in the act. Well, I sat there in the living room for a moment, and suddenly I heard the sound again. However, this time, with hearing it, I was also able to actually see it happen. The banging noise that had the entire household on guard turned out to be our 2-year-old female red-eared slider turtle named Thor. Never in the time before this did she ever make much of a noise, but for some reason she started to take the habit of pushing her head against the lid covering the tank. She did this with so much force it would lift up and bang loudly back down. Now, don't get me wrong, all the other activity was paranormal, but the banging noise? Not so much. Who knows? Our female turtle is a bit ornery, so maybe she was trying to get at the ghost. On a side note, I saw a question about this story when I uploaded it a month ago by one of my longtime viewers named Jennifer Lawrence. She asked, "Who names a female turtle Thor?" We actually have 2 turtles, a male and a female, and the female is Thor and the male is Loki. We bought them very young, and to the untrained eye, much like us at the time, turtles are very hard to sex until they get older. So we named them Thor and Loki, and when we realized Thor was female, we just kept the names. We figure the name still fits, since in some versions of the story, Thor could be female. Be still, my heart. The following story is one that started the idea for this video, and I hope you enjoy it. A few nights ago, I was downstairs alone at around 11 or 12 o'clock. Over the past few days, I've gotten into the habit of watching reaction channels on YouTube dealing with the paranormal videos. To paint the picture clearly, I watch these videos on my Xbox, and I wear headphones to not disturb the rest of the house. Well, one channel that I've been watching for quite some time is called No Life Shack, and he normally reacts to music videos. On that night, I just happened to come across his reaction to the music video made by the band Avenged Sevenfold, entitled A Little Piece of Heaven. In this animated video, it is a bit disturbing when the characters at different parts of the story kill one another and eat their hearts at the prodding of a skeleton choir. Like I said, it is very odd. The video isn't scary at all, at least for me. Immediately after watching the reaction to this video, I started to hear something really odd, and it was loud enough that I could even hear it through my headphones. I paused the video and took the headphones off to find out what was making the noise. After only a moment, the sound became very clear, and I was left speechless. It was the sound of a beating heart. I recorded this sound, so at some point it should be playing for you. As I have stated in the past, normally when odd things happen in the house, I go into detective mode rather than running away. I think my frequent sightings of spirits, and even having my first encounter with one when I was very young, has left me a bit desensitized. I couldn't help but think that my mind was playing tricks on me since I had just got done watching a video about beating hearts, and now I was hearing one. I got out of my chair and walked slowly to every room trying to locate the sound. I kid you not, the only location it seemed strongest was when I neared the heater vents in the living room, obviously meaning the sound was probably originating from the basement. I went down into the basement with our dogs, since they wanted to go outside at that moment, and I just listened. Nothing. The basement was absolutely quiet. So I returned to the living room, and again I could hear the slow beating of a heart. I made my way upstairs to our bedroom, where I found my wife still awake in bed. I asked her if she had heard anything odd, and she told me she hadn't. Then she asked me what the sound was that I kept hearing, and I paused for a moment and said, well... It sounds like a beating heart. I then proceeded to tell her about the video I had watched, how I thought it was in the basement, and it wasn't, and that the only place I could really hear it was in the living room. After thinking about it for a moment, she kind of got this half smirk on her face and asked, "Did you happen to get into the drawers in the coffee table?" I replied that I had, earlier, when I was looking for some sinus medicine due to having a headache coming on. She then laughed, and shockingly at that moment I didn't think my wife had hidden a human heart in our living room. She proceeded to tell me that what I was probably hearing was the little removable toy heart that was included with a plush sheep to help our new puppy Bear. The toy, when clicked on, makes a heartbeat sound and is supposed to reduce anxiety, but we had to remove it since he would rather chew on it. I immediately went downstairs, opened the drawer, and lo and behold, that's what was making the noise. I couldn't help but find it odd that I had opened that drawer originally a few hours before and didn't hear the sound until after watching that video. Very coincidental, I must admit. Even as such, it was a moment that we both can laugh at. I kept thinking I had another story involving my brother when we were on a job together, but neither of us could remember what it was. All we could remember was working at an old abandoned funeral home, and dare I say, none of those stories were funny. So, those were 4 of the funniest stories that I have encountered. I hope you enjoyed them, and it was a nice break from the seriousness of most of my topics. If you didn't like it, that's completely fine. We all have different tastes. But you will be happy to know that next week, we will be returning to Crypto by State, where we are visiting Kentucky. If you haven't yet done so, do please consider subscribing to my channel for more content kind of like this, but not really. Also, I'd appreciate it if you could share my videos with someone you know who may be interested in this type of genre. With that, be safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.